Meanwhile, the Biden administration said this week it would send $1 billion worth of weapons to Israel. Doing so requires certain approvals from members of Congress. Not all of them, even President Biden's fellow Democrats, are on board with sending that assistance, including Congresswoman Jayapal, chair of the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives. Here's what she told us earlier.
Well, I think the Biden administration is still working to kind of outline their doctrine in this moment towards the Middle East and towards Israel funding. You heard the president last week make very clear on an interview that he is not going to provide offensive weapons to Israel if Israel launches a full-scale invasion of Rafah. He also said that they had withheld a shipment of bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, to Israel, which is still being withheld. The most recent assistance is troubling to us because it hasn't really been put into context. My understanding is that it is defensive weapons that are part of the weapons that have been approved for some time. But I think that what I have communicated to them is it's very confusing because it muddies the message. I've also said that the president drew a red line on the Rafah invasion. I want to make sure that that red line is not so thin you can't see it, because what we're seeing in Rafah today is the amassing of troops to go into Rafah, the leafleting within Rafah, 350,000 Palestinians who have already fled Rafah, these and some ground tanks that have already made their way into Rafah.
Do you believe there's an enforcement of that red line? I mean, that if Israel, as you said, it appears that Israel is starting this ground operation. We don't know exactly what that looks like yet. Yeah. What do you expect to see from the Biden administration there?
Well, I think that the president has been clear, and I spoke to him this weekend a couple of times on this topic. He has been clear, and he's not backing down, that if there is an invasion of Rafah, that there will be no more offensive military assistance provided to Israel. And the question is, what constitutes that invasion? People are fleeing. There's no safe place to go. There are tanks in Rafah. The Israeli army has taken over the Rafah crossing. Aid has essentially stopped. I spoke to Administrator Powers just a couple of days ago, and she told me that the average trucks per day for the last 7 days was 30 trucks per day that were making their way into Gaza, humanitarian assistance. That is paltry, meaningless, absolutely unacceptable for a place where famine has already set in and 1.1 million people are on the brink of starvation.
And we spoke to one of your colleagues, Congresswoman Kathy Manning, a Democrat from North Carolina, and she told us, look, the U.S. has to live up to the agreements that have already been made to Israel and help it defend Hamas. What is your response to that, that Israel is doing what it needs to do to defeat Hamas?
Well, I think my response is that the United States will always be there for defensive assistance against Hezbollah, against Iran, to protect innocent Israelis with the Iron Dome, with the kinds of technology that are required in a defensive mode. What we will not do and should not do is contribute to an offensive on innocent Palestinians that have already led to over 35,000 people dead, over 75,000 injured, largely women and children, and in a fight that the United States itself has said is not the way to defeat Hamas. I said after October 7th that that was a horrific attack. I condemned Hamas. I even defended Israel's right to defend itself. But that does not include violating U.S. domestic policy, withholding humanitarian assistance. It does not include violating international humanitarian law, which I believe has happened.
Israel has said very clearly, we are not responsible here. Hamas is embedding itself among civilians.
International humanitarian law does not distinguish between the cause of an event and the consequences of an invasion or of military action. So you can't say, because you did this bad thing to me, I am able to go in and target innocent civilians with impunity. That's just not how it works. That is why international humanitarian law very clearly states that it does not take into account what started an event. whether you agree with or disagree with what started an event, it really looks at how do you minimize casualties of innocent civilians once a conflict has started.